everyone for coming out today. I appreciate it, and I'm looking forward to talking to you. It is a small group, so I think we have some flexibility. If you have questions and you want to interject them into the conversation, I think that would be great as we go along. I'm just going to talk a little bit about me, about the center, what we do at the center, why I think it matters, why it's important, and some of the issues that we're facing as a community, as the LGBTQ community in Washington, D.C. Like I said, if you have questions along the way, feel free to shout them out. I start with a little bit about me, and I know this is a dorky thing for some folks, but I have a personal mission statement. I highly recommend them. I think that at some point in your career, you hit a moment where you know who you are and what you do, and it's really important to kind of focus on that. I wrote this personal mission statement before I started working at the center, and before the job that I have now existed at the center. But when I saw the opportunity at the center, I just already knew it aligned with what is important to me. So what I love to do is provide people with the tools, the training, and the support they need to make meaningful change in their local community. And I just strongly believe in the ability of local communities to organize for change and to achieve change. And we've seen some amazing progress locally here in DC since I've been at the center, so I'm excited for that. I've always worked on LGBTQ issues, I've worked on HIV and AIDS issues, and I've worked a little in progressive politics on some campaigns. But I view all of that work in a broader social justice context. And I think there's a growing number of people who do the same. For me, it's important to know what my skills are and what I bring to the table, what issues I'm knowledgeable about, what I can advocate for effectively, but also keep in context that there is a larger social justice movement that we're all a part of. So I wanted to share some core beliefs that I think are integral to what I do at the center and what my board believes and what our staff believes and how it shapes the kind of work that we do at the center. And this first one is from an AIDS activist from ACT UP Philly, Kiyoshi Kuramiya, who's a famous AIDS activist from back in the day. He said many, many times, we are the experts on our own lives. And as queer, as LGBTQ folks, I believe that to be very true. I see groups meeting at the center all of the time that are new and different, and not even groups that I necessarily envisioned 8 years ago, 9 years ago, when I was kind of starting at the center, even existing. I had no idea that we were going to have, at some point, a genderqueer, gender non-binary group that had so many people in it and was so active. I didn't foresee that. But I love the fact that there's a place like the center where folks can come together and be their own advocates. And I think it's true for all of those communities that meet. Those folks are the experts on their own lives, and academia informs stuff, data informs us and helps guide the community. But at the end of the day, those folks know what their needs are. And my role is to kind of support them in that. So I think that's a really fundamental core belief. Another one which, is part of a lot of social justice movements, nothing about us without us is for us. So I think one of the important roles that I play with the LGBTQ community in DC is connecting folks with the LGBTQ community who want to be advocates for the community, who want to work with the community. I don't know if you all know or heard about the Work for Peace protest outside Mike Pence's house. Did you all see that in the news? Were you there? Excellent. So Work for Peace, the group that organized that, came to the center a couple weeks ago and they said, we want to organize a protest tomorrow, which people sometimes do, in support of trans youth because of what was happening at the federal level with Donald Trump. And what I loved about them and where we kind of gel on our core beliefs is Faraz, who organizes that group, came to the center and said, I want to do this and I believe in it, but I'm not going to do it without the transgender community. So if we can't find a transgender community organization that wants to work with us to do it, we're not going to do it. If we can't have transgender folks on camera speaking about their own issues in their own voice, we're not going to do it. And we, within a few hours, found 2 transgender organizations that were like, well, if Firas is throwing a dance party, we definitely want to come and talk about our issues. And so I think having that kind of core value and core belief is really central to who we are and what we do. We don't move forward on an issue for genderqueer folks without genderqueer voices. We don't move forward on an issue for the transgender community without buy-in and support and partnership with the transgender community, period. Let's see. Another one that I think is really fundamental to the center, and as we've grown throughout the years, there's no such thing as a single issue struggle because we do not live single issue lives. And I just see that time and time and again with the people that come into the center, the folks that we have the opportunity to work with bring whatever other issues that they're dealing with to that work. So we have a Latinx task force. If you're unfamiliar, Latinx is the newer non-binary way to refer to the Latino community. We have a Latinx task force at the center, and we have a lot of undocumented folks and a lot of folks that are dealing with those issues right now. We have a South Asian LGBT support group that meets at the DC Center. We have a lot of Muslim LGBTQ folks that are part of our community. And as the center, I think we have a responsibility to welcome everyone, and not just welcome everyone around the LGBTQ issues, but see that whole person and address the whole issues, the whole struggles that they're facing. So I think that's a really important one. Again, we have groups that have started at the center since I've been there. 4 months ago, we had someone come to me and say, I want to start a group for LGBTQ folks with disabilities. And I said, well, we'll try it and we'll see who shows up. And believe it or not, folks showed up and are participating in that group. I don't know what it's going to become. I don't know what their issues are going to be 3 months from now, 4 months from now, but I know that that process is beginning and it's exciting. So I also think there's some definite values that we bring to our work at the center that are important to keep in mind. One which I've just mentioned before is I believe so strongly, and I think we all do, in the power of bringing people together and building community. For LGBTQ folks, I think that's even more important because some of us are just simply not visible, right? Or have not come out yet, or are struggling to find a voice. And so one of the most important things we do, and one of the things that we value, is just bringing people together. And like I said, we don't always have experts at the room. When the disability group met, I don't have funding for them. I don't have best practices for queer people with disabilities. It doesn't exist yet. So I don't have the kinds of tools that I would like to have. But I think sometimes you just have to step forward and say, those folks are going to build community among themselves, and they're going to tell us what their issues are, and they're going to speak, and we're going to figure it out together along the way. So very much believe in that. I have one person who has been a supporter for the center for maybe 8, 9 years, Alexandra Chandler, who has been a part of the center, lives with her partner, Catherine, and their 2 beautiful kids. They used to, back in the day, be part of Women in Their 20s, and now they're not quite in their 20s anymore. They're, getting older. I think for a lot of folks, they looked at Catherine and Alexandra and saw a lesbian couple, which is what I saw for a long time. And I still do, obviously. But Alexandra recently came out in the Washington Post as one of the highest ranking transgender women at the Pentagon, which was very exciting and powerful. And I think that kind of courage is made possible through community and through support and through having a group of folks that have your back. Because it's not easy, going to a PTA meeting and as being a member of like your kid's PTA, and their kids are like, 6 and 2, they're little kids. But to go and to kind of disclose that information about yourself, or to go to your employer and disclose that information. But there's so much power in it. And there's so much power in our visibility. And that's made possible by building community. So I think that's really important. I believe in empowerment. I believe that folks are capable of so much more than we sometimes give them credit for. And so we invest a lot of time at the center in building people's tools and people's skill sets. And sometimes when we hire folks at the center, we hire folks maybe not weighing their academic credentials lightly. That's important too, especially for some positions where we have to have folks who are LICSWs or things like that. But also like weighing their experience in the community and their connection to the community and their life experience, and seeing how we can take that and give them the skills that they need to be advocates. I think that that's an amazing thing when you can do it. So we have a peer educator named Charisse, who is amazing, is a returning citizen and a transgender woman, who recently organized the International Day to End Violence Against Sex Workers in DC, which was very exciting. It's the first time the city council has ever passed a resolution that mentioned sex workers in a favorable light. And it was a wonderful event. I don't think Charisse necessarily came to the center with all the skills to make that happen, but what's exciting is to be able to see someone develop those skills there. And so empowerment is really important, I think, and being willing to let go and trust the community. At the center, we're able to do much more and be much more visible than our small staff would indicate. Sometimes people come to the center and they see, oh, this is the entire center, because they see our presence in the community and our ability to create change, and they assume we have a lot of staff, or they assume we have a lot of money. And we don't, but we have an amazing group of volunteers that are empowered to be advocates and that receive the support they need. And one of the secrets I've learned since I've been at the center is that activists really like being activists when you take away all the other things that they don't like to do. So the DC Center deals with liability insurance and having speakerphones and having megaphones and protest equipment. And we deal with payroll, and we serve as fiscal sponsor for organizations that don't want to manage their own finances. But when you take that kind of administrative burden off of folks, they're even more excited about being activists, because that's really what they want to do, right? And I think that that's one place where we really blossom. And then another core value is justice. I feel like a lot of emphasis, since we're in Washington and it's very political and there's a lot of focus on the federal level, there's a lot of talk about equality, and I think equality is really important, but equality isn't always what's applicable or necessary for our community. When you look at a transgender community in DC, that in some studies, like the DC Trans Needs Assessment, have up to a 70% unemployment rate. Fixing that kind of monumental disparity is going to mean changing the way that money is allocated, changing the amount of resources that are dedicated to the transgender community. So it's more than just getting us to equality, it's getting us to equity. And that means, that in a lot of cases in DC, we need to look at how we're spending money and where the resources go, and how our community is being supported. I recently submitted a FOIA, Freedom of Information Act request, to the DC Office of Aging as an example. And They are tracking the number of LGBTQ folks that are served by all the agencies funded through the DC Office of Aging all across the city. But they were very reluctant to release that data. And that's because LGBTQ seniors make up about 10% of the DC population, according to the Williams Institute. But they represent less than 1% of funding that's spent on LGBTQ older adults in DC. So let me just say that again so it sinks in. Less than 1% of the money spent on seniors in DC goes to LGBTQ older adults. So there's a lot of challenges that we have to face, and sometimes people feel like justice is an activist word or an overtly political word, but that is an injustice for our older LGBT adults. Yeah.
I have a question. So how is that determined? Does an LGBTQ senior have to identify him or herself when they go and seek these services? Like, how do they know what the orientation of the person?
So I think it's based both on a survey that they do and on intake forms. And so we
Ask that on the intake form?
in the past they have. It's a matter of debate as to what's happening currently. So we have to be effective advocates with the Office of Aging, because really there's a lot more that could be done. If you are an LGBTQ older adult in Chicago, for example, there is a daily meal program congregate meal program for LGBTQ older adults, which is something I would love to be able to do in DC. What we know about LGBTQ older adults, for example, is 2/3 of heterosexual folks will grow old with a partner to support them, and they're more likely to have children to support them as they age. This generation of LGBTQ older adults, 2/3 of them are growing old single, and they're less likely to have children to support them as they age. So there's a lot of work that we can do in that area to support our folks and build community. We do a coffee hour every Monday morning from 10 a.m. to noon at the center for older adults. So if anyone's ever free, you can come have coffee with some of our fabulous seniors, and they can tell you stories about the old bars in DC and what activism was like back in the day. It's very fun. But those folks also need community and support, and we need to be effective advocates for that. I'm going to talk a little bit about LGBTQ community centers. Someone asked the question about our center before we started, so we'll just say for folks who've never visited. We're at 2000 14th Street Northwest in the Reeves Center. We have free Wi-Fi. It's fun. Come out, hang out with us anytime. We have an amazing list of volunteer opportunities for individuals and for groups. So if you ever want to get involved, you can. If you want to make dinner for a group of homeless LGBTQ youth in one of the homeless shelters, you can sign up and you and your friends can take over dinner one night. If you want to make dinner we have a monthly dinner for our asylum seekers and refugees to get together and have support and community. Same thing, if you and your friends want to get together and make dinner for them and come hang out with our asylum seekers, you're welcome to do it. There's a lot of different ways that you can get involved in the center. So I'll just mention that, and lots of great stuff that happens. Our work falls into a few core areas: arts and cultural programs, like the amazing Real Affirmations Film Festival that we do, health and wellness programs to address health disparities that impact the LGBTQ community. And that includes our partnership with the GW Cancer Institute around cancer and breast cancer awareness. It includes HIV and AIDS, smoking cessation, and things like that. We have another core area is social and support groups. And we have about 20 support groups that meet at the center, which is more than I ever thought that we would have. We have 2 trans support groups that meet monthly, 1 genderqueer support group. We have a poly support group. Does everyone know what I mean when I say poly? Awesome. Poly is folks who believe you can have a loving, consensual relationship with more than one person at the same time. So we have some poly families at the center. We have young gay men, bisexual, coming out, all sorts of groups that meet at the center. And then our fourth core area is advocacy. And so we do have some great groups that just work on being effective advocates for the community. And that includes our work advocating for LGBTQ youth through our youth working group. There's now over 200 LGBT community centers in the United States. They're in 46 states and DC. The average center is about 20 years old. We're about 10 years old. And the median center is about 18 years old. In the big picture of what's happening around the country, we are a little behind the curve. So if you look at, according to like the census, statistical metropolitan areas, the 5 cities that have the biggest LGBTQ population are New York, DC, San Francisco, LA, Chicago. Those other cities I mentioned have LGBTQ community centers with budgets between $3 million all the way up to the LA center is probably at 50 or 60 million at this point. And we've never broken, we're at about $500,000. So we're at about 25% of the smallest of those, which means there's still a lot of services we can't provide to the community. And there's still a lot of services, frankly, that LGBTQ, genderqueer folks don't receive in the city. If you're a male, heterosexual, gay, and you're the victim, or gay, or you're the victim of domestic violence, there's still no safe houses for men who experience domestic violence in DC. So there's a lot of unacceptable things that are still happening. But in some of those other cities that I mentioned, the LGBT centers are addressing some of those issues. Like I mentioned, the Chicago Center that does a monthly or weekly, every day, Monday through Friday, lunch program for LGBTQ older adults. You could take our entire community center, you could fit it inside the Chicago Center 25 times and still have enough room for a basketball court, which they have at the Chicago Center. So I say that just to put things into perspective, because I think DC Council is really great about passing laws, but we're fairly behind when it comes to committing money and committing resources to supporting the LGBTQ community. Since we can make this a little bit more conversational, any other questions about community centers? Yeah.
Are there any in the nearby suburbs of Maryland or Virginia?
So there's a center in Baltimore, and there are other community centers here in DC now. When I started, we were the only one, but Casa Ruby is a de facto community center. And there's other drop-in centers that are specific to LGBTQ youth in DC now. Any other questions about community centers? Yeah. We're located in the Reeves Center. So the Reeves Center is part of the city, but we pay rent along with the post office and the other tenants that rent space on the first floor. We're not an aspect of the city. But I love that location for a lot of reasons. One, we're close to the metro, we're on the bus line, we're accessible. Two, there's a lot of DC agencies in the Reeves Center that benefit our community. So the mayor's office of LGBTQ affairs is located in the office directly above us. So I can pop up and talk to the mayor's liaison on LGBTQ affairs until she gets sick of talking to me. We also have the Office of Latino Affairs in that building. There's a job training center in that building. The Mayor's Office of Community Service is in that building. So it's a good place for us to be in terms of partnering with the city. And then the other thing I found when we were really looking about where in the city we want to have a community center was that there is no simple answer to where LGBTQ folks live in DC anymore. We're spreading out all across the city. But we did look at some census data, and one of the things that we found was like, DuPont has a lot of LGBTQ folks still, DuPont, Logan, but disproportionately it's white LGBTQ folks that live in those neighborhoods. Latino LGBTQ folks, according to the census data, still primarily live in Latino neighborhoods. So a lot of our folks are in Columbia Heights, which is one metro stop away from the center, which is nice. And then a lot of African American LGBTQ folks who grew up in DC end up living in the neighborhoods they grew up in. So it's hard to find a location that's perfect for everyone in the city because, like I said, we're spreading out across the city and there's different communities to consider. But for us, this is a really good location because we're walking distance from DuPont and Logan, but we're also accessible to other communities too. Cool. I'll keep going. LGBTQ community centers do a lot of different things. I'm going to mention some of them and just talk a little bit about our context for that. Physical and mental health programs. I mentioned that we do cancer prevention, that we're doing HIV prevention work. We have a new iPhone app called Be Prepped you can download on your iPhone to give you information about pre-exposure prophylaxis as a form of HIV prevention. We also, for the first time this year, got a full-time social worker, and we're bringing on a part-time social worker just in a couple weeks, which I'm very excited about because that's really been lacking for our community. For the first time ever this year, if someone is a victim of a hate crime or sexual assault or intimate partner violence, we have someone in-house that can provide individual and group counseling. And that's super important too, because again, not every male who's experienced domestic violence or sexual assault feels comfortable going to spaces that aren't specifically for them. We have a lot of informational and educational programs at the center. If you look on our website, thedccenter.org, there are 300 plus LGBTQ organizations in our organizational directory. There is something for everyone in DC as far as LGBTQ folks, including our own LGBT water polo team. I bet you did not know that. Social and recreational programs. So we do the support groups, and we do have social events that happen at the center. And really, some people may look at that and say that's not social justice work, but community building for us really is social justice work, as I said, because bringing people together, creating spaces where people feel comfortable is super important for our community. We're going to do, once again this year, Gay Day at the Zoo, the first Sunday in May, and I know some of you will be coming out and wearing your Gay Panda t-shirts. And it's a fun event, and it's a light event, but for some gay folks, for some LGBTQ folks, that will be the first time they hang out with other gay people outside a gay bar. That will be the first time they hang out with gay people in a venue that doesn't serve alcohol. That will be the first time that they come to the transgender meetup at Gay Day at the Zoo and present as the gender that they are. So that creating spaces where people can build community and feel visible. It is social and it is fun, but it's also part of the bigger picture of social justice for us. Community outreach and civic engagement. We do a lot of testifying at oversight hearings for the city, a lot of work engaging the community on the issues that are important to us. Just by being here, just by me giving you some perspective on funding and some of the issues that we face, hopefully that resonates beyond this room at some point. A lot of LGBTQ community centers do arts and cultural programs, as do we. And again, they are arts and cultural programs, but they're also part of our social justice work. They're also part of people seeing themselves. There's been a lot of discussion, in mainstream media about having LGBTQ voices represented, but there's still a lot of LGBTQ voices and other sexual minority voices that aren't seen on the big screen, right? Whether that be LGBTQ people of color, whether it be genderqueer or non-conforming people, whether it be asexual folks. I think I just saw the first 2 asexual TV characters coming out. So our films and our arts and cultural programs really give voice to the diversity that's in our community and let people see their own lives and their own stories, whether that be on the big screen or whether that be in literature or whether that be in poetry. And that's powerful for folks. Legal referrals, a lot of community centers do legal referrals. For us, our primary work around legal referrals is with our asylum seekers and refugees. We're a little bit unique in that a lot of community centers don't have a lot of asylum seekers and refugees, but we have a lot of asylum seekers. So we've probably, since we kicked off that program 4 years ago, we've probably had 100 folks that have fled their home countries, and they've come from Russia, they've come from Uganda, Jamaica, Iraq, Kenya, they've come from Ethiopia, anywhere where you can imagine where it's illegal to be LGBTQ or where you face violence for being an LGBTQ person. And those folks need a lawyer to help with asylum, and often they come with no resources at all. Our first asylum couple were from Kenya, and James and Cyrus, and one of them was a national news personality in the country, and the other one was his cameraman. And James and Cyrus fell in love and moved in together, and people at the TV station found out. And because of his role as a public figure in that country, it quickly became unsafe for them to stay in that country. And so they left with practically nothing. A lot of Americans these days do not have 2 months or 3 months of living expenses saved up in their bank account, let alone people from other countries, right? So they had enough for their plane ticket. They spent the last of their money getting a marriage license in DC. And then they came to the center with virtually nothing. And that's very common for our asylum seekers and refugees. So a lot of times they need financial assistance, they need food, they need a couch to sleep on, and they need a lawyer. Fortunately, there are a lot of lawyers in DC. So that's probably the thing that we have the least trouble with, if you can believe that. We do, a lot of communities do that. And then a lot of LGBTQ community centers have computer centers. So we have a computer lounge with 8 top-of-the-line Macs provided by the Bonet Foundation. Does anybody remember GeoCities? Is anyone as old as me? Nobody remembers. You will have to Google it. David Bonet was one of the early investors in the internet and created this company and sold it. And his foundation now provides computers to basically all of the community centers around the country. So every 5 years we get brand new computers, which is very nice. And people use those to search for jobs. They use those to do community organizing, and that's free if you come to the center and you need to do that stuff. Yeah. We do work with some churches in the city. A lot of the, like I mentioned, there's group volunteer opportunities where you can make dinner for asylum seekers. So a lot of churches have adopted 1 month a year, and they'll come and they'll cook dinner and do that work. We've gotten a grant from the Unitarian Universalist Church in DC, which is very nice. And we have a faith community at the center called the DC, which you can find at dccenter.org/faith. We have so many affirming LGBTQ affirming churches in DC. It's amazing and wonderful. We bring faith leaders together to do an annual interfaith pride service around Pride season. It is, other than the Pride Parade, the longest standing tradition for Pride in DC is an interfaith service. And when I say interfaith, I mean it's a party and everybody is there. So I would encourage you to check it out sometime because you can learn a lot by sitting in. Yeah?
A question about the programs. Do you have any mentorship for LGBTQ homeless program?
So, so we've kind of struggled with mentoring an LGBTQ homeless youth. There's a couple agencies in DC that we've tried to work with. CASA DC is one of them. I don't know if you know. CASA stands for Court Appointed Special Advocates for LGBTQ youth, or Court Appointed Special Advocates for youth in foster care, not LGBTQ specific. But we have recruited from folks from our community and held events at the center to get more community members from the LGBTQ community to be court-appointed special advocates for youth in foster care, because CASA DC recognized that it would be helpful to have more youth or have more mentors that are from our community. I will say they're still kind of struggling a little bit with how that works, and there's still, so it's not a perfect process, but it is a great place to get plugged in. What I love about CASAs or court-appointed special advocates is a youth in foster care may have many different placements between the ages of like 10 and 18 or 10 and 20, sometimes it goes, that high. So you may have 3 or 4 placements, but if you have a CASA that's committed to you, they stay with you through all of the placements. And what's nice about that too is that person is your advocate and advocates for you. So we had a dispute with a young person in foster care whose foster parents did not want him to dress in a gender nonconforming way and complained, and made him change outfits. And that person's CASA and their social work support team could advocate for him in that particular case. Cool. And then we've also done events encouraging, just talking about homeless youth, we've also done events encouraging LGBTQ adults to be foster parents for older LGBTQ youth. Because, once you hit a certain age in foster care, it's really difficult to get a placement. But one of my good friends, Dan, is a foster parent to a 17-year-old right now as a single guy. The former vice president of the DC Center, Michelle Ross, is a foster parent to a teenager who's an LGBTQ young person in the foster care system. So I think that there's there's a lot of different ways where we can tackle the homeless issue. Cool, All right, I'm gonna keep going. Together, LGBTQ community centers serve about 1.7 million people annually, which is kind of amazing. And the folks that come to community centers, this is pretty consistent across the board, are disproportionately male, people of color, trans, and or low income. And it probably doesn't come as a huge surprise that, as far as low income, that folks who need help more are the folks who are more likely to come to community centers. It's a challenge sometimes making a space that feels welcoming to everyone. And DC is a city that is so divided by race and class and socioeconomic status that when the center was at 1318 U Street, I had a financial planner who was organizing events for women, and she came into the center and she said, "This place is just way too dumpy. This is dump, I could never do an event here." And then I had a guy who works with homeless youth from the Latin American Youth Center come and look at the space, and literally the same day said to me, "This place is way too bougie. U Street is way too bougie. There's no way I could ever do an event here." So we constantly kind of struggle with what the right balance is for that, and I'm still not completely convinced there's a way to do it, but we try. In terms of seeking justice for our community, I just wanted to reiterate the point that I made earlier. Justice means equality for equals and inequality for unequals. That's a quote from C.S. Lewis. And I think it's an interesting thing to say, because we talk about equality in the LGBTQ movement a lot, and having equal rights is really important, but eliminating the disparities that are affecting our community means that there's going to be a disproportionate focus on resources at some point. mentioning homeless LGBTQ youth, we participated in the last census of homeless LGBTQ youth, and it is a process. It's a week of the city where literally you go under bridges and to Chinatown at 3 a.m. and all across the city and document every homeless young person that you can find for the week, and collect that data. And in the 2015 census, 43% of the youth that were homeless, that were sleeping on the streets, were LGBTQ youth. 43%. And not all of them, by the way, are from DC. Some of them are folks who, I don't want to get emotional again, but some of them are folks who come from will buy a bus ticket and will come because they heard something about DC helping people, or they heard we had a shelter for homeless LGBTQ youth, or we heard that there's hope here that's more than wherever they're from. I had a young transgender woman from North Carolina, and I said, how did you end up, if you're from North Carolina, how did you end up here? And she's like, Earlene Budd is a transgender activist in DC. She said, I saw Miss Earlene Budd on the television, and I just figured things would be better for me here. And so I just got a bus ticket and left. And again, showed up with no financial resources whatsoever. But 43%, and addressing that issue is going to mean a disproportionate allocation of resources for us. It means that we need shelters that are for LGBTQ youth in DC. And fortunately, since we started advocating, we now have 3, but it's still not enough to cover all the homeless youth that are in DC. I'm going to talk a little bit about where the disparities exist, where we fight for justice for our community. There are incredible disparities in physical and mental health and access to services for health and wellness and for mental health for LGBTQ folks. Obviously, in terms of HIV and AIDS, I think that's probably the issue that everybody kind of goes to first. But we know from behavioral risk factor surveillance survey data and youth risk behavior survey data, and I'll mention that more in detail later, LGBTQ folks in DC have higher binge drinking rates, have higher substance abuse rates, have experienced depression at different rates than other folks. And our advocates of LGBTQ folks, or work to get funding for those. People who oppose us will say, well, look, isn't that proof that there's something wrong with you? Because you have higher mental health issues, you have higher substance abuse issues, you have higher depression issues. How can you be happy as an LGBTQ person? But what we found from the Youth Risk Behavior Survey, the Massachusetts Youth Risk Behavior Survey looked at young people who were experiencing depression, who were experiencing higher rates of substance use or sexual risk taking. And what they found was, or even smoking, what they found was those youth who were engaging in those, what are basically stress coping mechanisms, were the same youth that were getting beat up in school, were the same youth who reported in their YRBS they didn't feel safe going to school, that they'd taken a weapon to protect themselves at some point trying to get to school, that they were being harassed. So we look at definitely at physical and mental health issues that affect our community, but we also look at the larger context in which those happen and how we can address those issues as well. Employment, again, continues to be an issue. If you look at the Office of Human Rights kind of discrimination report, we know that discrimination against transgender folks is very real in DC. Our Office of Human Rights is the first one ever to do kind of a proactive study of transgender employment. And they went to 4 major companies in DC and sent out resumes and applied for jobs. And they sent out cisgender or resumes from folks who aren't transgender. And they sent out resumes that indicated that somewhere on the resume indicated that they might be transgender. And it was as small as your high school diploma name not matching the name on your resume, or some indicator, or that you volunteered for a transgender group on your resume. And not shockingly, in almost every case, The less qualified cisgender candidates got called for interviews, and the transgender folks did not. So we know that that kind of employment discrimination is real for trans folks. I've also worked with folks who are, helped folks file complaints, discrimination complaints based on HIV status. We had a waiter at a restaurant on 14th Street who got a glowing review from his manager. And then the owner of the restaurant saw him taking AIDS medication, HIV medication in the workplace, and he lost his job the following day. So we still have those kinds of issues as well. We have disparities with prisons in DC and the criminal justice system. I don't know, how am I for time? Am I okay? What time am I? I guess I'll try and wrap up soon. I'll mention Keon Herder because I just feel like I want to tell his story. Keon was a homeless LGBTQ young person who was in a shelter, who was beat up in that shelter. He was chased out of the shelter by another shelter client, chased into a McDonald's, beaten up to the point where he had to have surgery because his eye socket was dislocated. Keon, 6 months later, was still homeless, was scared to go to homeless shelters. There was no room at Casa Ruby. There was no room at Wanda Alston at the time. And he stole someone's purse because he was desperate and on the streets. And I'm not excusing that behavior, but that's what happened. He ended up in DC prison. He ended up in DC prison with the man that attacked him and was assaulted again in DC prison. And DC prison's response to that was to take this boy who was 19 years old at the time, young man who was 19 years old at the time, and had recently been assaulted and was experiencing trauma, and put him in solitary confinement. Sorry. So he was in solitary confinement, I think, for 4 days before we got him out. So there's still a lot of injustice that happens in DC prisons. There's a lot of injustice that happens in terms of hate crimes that happen in DC. If you look at the closure rate for transgender murders are rarely solved in DC. So there's a lot of injustice there. There's injustice in access to all kinds of services. So that includes things like, I mentioned the Office of Aging. It includes access to restrooms in some cases. It includes a lot of the funding that goes throughout all the agencies in the city where LGBTQ folks are generally not at the table or not represented. There's a lot of disparities, like I mentioned, with asylum seekers and refugees. And then, as I mentioned, we're dealing also with intersectional issues. So we're dealing with, in this kind of new era of the Trump administration, we're dealing with supporting LGBTQ Muslim folks, supporting our folks who are undocumented or have questions, or even Latinx LGBTQ folks who have DACA and feel like they're relatively safe, but their parents are going to be, are at risk. So we have those issues to deal with as well. Where we find some of the documentation, and I'll just go over that, I'll just gloss over this because I think I may be running out of time. We look at the Youth Risk Behavior Survey, which is a CDC study conducted in partnership with the city. And fortunately, sexual orientation and gender identity questions have finally been added to that survey. The Behavioral Risk Factor Surveillance Survey, the city sometimes has sexual orientation and gender identity questions in that survey. Under one mayor, they had them in. Under another mayor, they took them out. But GW Cancer Institute has been an effective advocate, and GW has been an advocate for putting them back in. So I believe they are going to be in the next BRFIS. We look at the Human Rights Annual Report. We look at hate crimes data. We look at the National HIV Behavioral Surveillance Survey, the Homeless Youth Census, and then we have a number of community surveys that community members have done to fill in the gaps. So there's a DC Transgender Needs Assessment Study, and we've done studies, we've done more informal surveys with LGBTQ youth at Youth Pride and other youth events. And then anecdotal data, again, like people telling their own stories in their own words. Some of the places that we've made progress since I've been at the center, We passed an amazing LGBTQ cultural competency bill where people who serve medical providers who are required to get continuing education credits are now being phased in a requirement to get continuing education credits specifically around LGBTQ cultural competency or LGBTQ health issues. So there are literally doctors in DC who got their medical license when being LGBT was against the law in DC, and fortunately now they will be getting a refresher, which I think is very important. We passed a transgender equality bill, and I'm not taking credit for any of these, but these are some of the things that the community in DC has done. We now are one of the rare places where gender affirming care is required to be covered by all health insurance in DC. And it's one of the reasons why more transgender folks are moving to DC, because now we know that this is a place where your health insurance will cover gender affirming care. Obviously, we passed marriage equality years before anybody else did. And we passed the bill that made all single stall restrooms in DC are required to be gender neutral or all gender. Some places that we're working on, there's work in the council, there's a bill in the council now to end the trans panic or gay panic defense. In hate crime murders, people sometimes use the trans panic defense or gay panic defense as an excuse for why they killed someone. And will say, I freaked out because I didn't realize this person was transgender, and when I found out, I had a momentary lapse of judgment. That's no longer, hopefully that will no longer be an acceptable defense for killing someone in DC. We're working on getting commitments for better data collection in DC. We would love to see all gender restrooms in DC government buildings. And again, I'm always working on allocation of resources for our community. It's just, those are some of the things I'm working on. And the ways that we work on it, we focus on empowering and supporting community advocates, fostering community and the coming out process, partnering with researchers, it's important, and coalition building. So those are some of our strategies for working with the community. I will say, again, that some of the most effective advocates and some of the best work has been done by volunteers, and all I do is provide the meeting space, which doesn't seem like a big deal when we're in a beautiful space like this. But if you're in downtown DC and you're not affiliated with a university, meeting space is hard to come by sometimes. But I provide the organizing tools, the space, the facilitator, or whatever is needed to get that work jump-started. And then community members really take it from there. So those are just an overview of some of the things that we do at the center, some of our values and principles around the work we do, and some of the issues that we're facing. And then we do questions now? So questions?
So I have another question.
Yeah.
Do you actually offer any programs for parents of LGBTQ?
So we partner with Rainbow Families. Rainbow Families actually sublets a workstation at the center. And
And who are they?
they work with LGBTQ families. And most of the folks involved have younger kids. Once their children hit like 14 or 15, their kids are not interested in participating anymore. But they also do a class called Maybe Baby, which I think they just wrapped up the Maybe Baby class, which explores kind of all of your options for parenting in DC and the resources that you have. And of course, we're partnering with them for Gay Day at the Zoo because we're doing Gay Day at the Zoo on International Family Equality Day and having a big meetup with families and kids. Other questions? Quiet. Yeah.
Thank you for a great presentation. I love everything that work with you.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering how, when you're at AU, how we can support your center in all the great work that you're doing.
So I think there's a couple ways that like a university could support it. One, the group volunteer opportunities are super fun and amazing. And we have already some partnerships. I don't know, do you partner with us for Freshman Day of Service? I'm not, you don't know. Okay, awesome. So I think we're doing the Freshman Day of Service again this year, which is great. Giving folks an opportunity to come down and see the center as freshmen, I think, is wonderful, and also gives people, early in their school process, a feel for some of the resources that exist in DC. I think GW has been influential in being advocates for some of the data collection and the other stuff in terms of public health. So, if there are public health advocates, then I would love to kind of connect with them. And then if you have, folks who do data analysis, all of those kind of survey instruments that I mentioned, there are mounds of untapped information in those data sets. So if a graduate student, for example, wants to do a research project and look at smoking rates among LGBTQ youth in DC, you can get that YRBS data and do your own analysis and look at that data. And that helps us, and I can give you some pointers on some topics that you might want to explore. So it helps the student get, an interesting topic and an interesting kind of dissertation or paper or whatever they're working on. But it really helps us exhaust the research, get the research information that we really want. So all of those things would be great. Yeah,
Sorry.
That's fine.
So a language question. So you used the term Latinx earlier. That was the first time I ever heard that term. So how do I keep up? How do I know what the new identity terms are and that I should be maybe using this term instead of this term? It's like every day, seemingly some new.
So I agree. I think it's always changing. And what I try to do is just reflect the language of the folks that I talk to and the folks that are in the room. We have there's a group of African-American men who have sex with men that meet regularly at Howard University that identify same-gender loving and reject the term gay as being kind of a Eurocentric term. And so I just roll with it, and respect however people identify and try and stay up myself. But I agree, it's kind of ever expanding. And that's one of the things that makes it interesting, too, is how people identify. We have folks now in our poly group, some folks who have facilitated the poly group, which is very interesting to me. There's a married couple that have been married for like 15 years, and they're polyamorous. He has a girlfriend. She has a girlfriend. She's bisexual. He is not. He identifies as queer, and because he's part of a queer family. And that was a new one to me. I've never had someone say that to me before. So how we define our community, I think, is constantly changing and expanding, and it makes it interesting for me too.
What does queer mean, and what does I mean? I've seen LGBTQI.
Yeah, so I often refers to intersex, and that's folks who were born with body parts that may be inclusive of both what we normally think of as female and what we normally think of as male body parts. So it's akin to, but not the limited medical condition of being a hermaphrodite. But a lot of intersex folks have rejected that term hermaphrodite because, one, that just refers to one medical condition, and there's a larger number of medical conditions that could result in someone being intersex. And two, they just like intersex better.
And that condition is more common than people think. That condition would be born with. It's actually quite common.
Yeah, so we definitely have folks that identify as intersex, or not identify, in this case, that are intersex, that come to the center. They don't necessarily disclose that, and oftentimes they're there for the transgender support group, or they're there for a women's support group, but they may disclose at some point. So yeah, absolutely. And then queer, I think it's an all-encompassing term for folks who feel like they're part of that larger community. A lot of people consider it to be an empowering term, and a lot of people embrace that term if gay or lesbian or bisexual doesn't exactly fit where they are at their life. So for example, if you are a lesbian who's been in a relationship with someone for 15 years and have always identified as a lesbian, and then your partner comes out as a transgender man, and you stay in a relationship with that person. You are now a woman in a relationship with a transgender man, and to the outside world, lesbian doesn't fit as a label. So some people, I've met people who say, you know, now I just identify as queer because it's easier than explaining everything. It's just nice to just say queer because I don't have to get into all the details of what's going on. Any other questions?
Well, if there's no more questions, we invite you all to stay and have some snacks and maybe a word with David or each other. And I also want to point out that the library holds a number of other programs throughout the year. We have flyers up there if you're interested. And thank you all very much for coming.
Thank you.